My story takes place in the late 1970s. My husband and I were living with my father at the time, with our 4-year-old son and 1-year-old daughter. We lived with my father temporarily while we saved up money to afford our own place. Eventually, our hard work had paid off, and we were able to afford a trailer home, or as they are now called, a mobile home. We were excited to finally have a place to call our own. However, the excitement was soon short-lived. The trailer was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath, so my son and daughter were able to have their own rooms. They were still little, but we knew they would appreciate having their own room as they got older. We were able to fill our new home with furniture and all our belongings in one day, because our trailer was by no means big, and we didn't own that much stuff, so we were able to spend the night in our new home, the day we got the keys. After a long day of moving, my husband fell asleep on the couch in the living room. I decided to put the children to bed in their rooms, before waking my husband up to go to bed in our room. I walked my son to his room and tucked him into his toddler-sized bed. I then carried my infant daughter to her room and placed her in her bassinet. Everyone in the house was quickly sound asleep, except for me. So I was startled when I suddenly heard a voice, coming from the living room where my husband was sleeping. I made my way from the rooms back to the living room to see if my husband had awoken, but when I got there, he was still sound asleep on the couch. I looked out the windows to see if anyone was outside our trailer talking, but there was not a soul in sight. Then I heard the voice again. It was a deep, growl tone. It was way deeper than my husband's voice, and it didn't sound like him at all, yet I heard the voice coming from the direction where he laid. I slowly crept over to him, and could see that his mouth was in fact moving. He continued to growl and speak an unrecognizable language in that eerily deep tone. I got so scared that I shouted for my husband to wake up. At the sound of my voice, my husband jumped up from the couch and shouted at me, asking where our baby girl was and if she was okay. Before I could answer, he ran to her room and found her fast asleep in her bassinet. He exited her room with a sigh of relief. After asking him what that was all about, he proceeded to tell me that he had a horrible dream, that a voice was telling him to take the bassinet with our baby in it and throw it against the wall. He began to cry at the thought of him hurting our baby and said that he didn't know why he would dream such a horrible thing. Back then, my husband and I weren't ones to believe in the supernatural, so we couldn't help but rack our brains trying to find a logical explanation. After I told him about how he was sleep-talking, we couldn't help but wonder if it was the work of something sinister, and possibly demonic, that was the cause. I don't think my husband slept a wink that night, and neither did I. Fortunately though, after that first night, my husband no longer had any other terrible dreams like that, and I no longer caught him sleep-talking or growling in that deep, scary tone again. However, just as we thought that was a one-time occurrence and began to feel at peace in our new home, things took a turn for the worst. One night, my husband and I were laying in bed asleep when I was suddenly awoken to the feeling of something staring at me. I reluctantly opened my eyes and strained to peer into the darkness of our room. Once my eyes were adjusted, I was relieved to find my son standing at the end of our bed staring at us. I figured he had a nightmare or simply needed something, so I asked him what was wrong. However, he didn't respond to me. I continued to whisper his name and ask if he was okay, but still, he was unresponsive. So I decided to turn on the lamp on the nightstand next to my bed, which revealed a terrifying sight. My 4-year-old son stood completely still, unfazed by the light. As I leaned forward, closer to him, I was horrified to see that his eyes were rolling to the back of his head. His mouth was also moving in a way that looked like he was trying to say, "Mom," but only a faint squeak came out of his mouth each time. My husband woke up from the lamp now illuminating our room and gasped in horror at the sight of our son. My husband immediately picked up our son and took him back to his bed. When he came back to our room, he told me that he didn't wake up our son, but that he was because he heard that it can be dangerous to wake up someone while they are sleepwalking. I didn't question my husband's actions because I had no idea what to do in that situation, other than stare in horror at the state of our child. My husband told me not to worry and that our son was just sleepwalking, but I still couldn't sleep that night, as my brain was filled with worries about what horrifying thing would happen next to my family. I hadn't yet considered that our new home could be the cause of these strange occurrences, but I soon would. My son's sleepwalking became a regular occurrence after that first night, and each time, my husband would return him back to his bed without waking him up. Just as I was getting used to being woken up by this, I was startled awake in the middle of the night by something different. This time, it was not from my son staring at me, but from a loud crash. The sound was so loud that my entire family was woken up. My son came running into our room from his, and I could hear my baby crying in her bassinet, and my husband was jumping out of bed reaching for his metal bat, all in a matter of seconds. I too jumped out of bed, and instinctively picked up my son and ran to the baby's room where she was crying. My husband followed me, and swiftly checked the room for the cause of the startling crash. It was upon his search that he checked our daughter's closet, and found that the pole that hangs the clothes had collapsed. Our daughter's clothes weren't heavy in the slightest, and there weren't that many hanging up, so for the pole to collapse was very odd. My husband decided to continue checking our home for a possible intruder, because the idea that the pole fell on its own didn't make much sense, since it had stayed secure this long. I stayed in my daughter's room with my son, as my husband checked the rest of the trailer. When he returned to where we were, he came back with an even more confused look on his face. He then proceeded to tell me that the clothing pole in our bedroom closet and the one in our son's closet had also collapsed. Our minds were completely baffled, and we couldn't think of a logical explanation for what caused all the poles to fall. My husband hadn't found any other sign of an intruder either. I once again found myself unable to sleep as I racked my brain for some sort of explanation, but I couldn't find one. The next scary and strange thing to occur was another bump in the night. My family and I were sound asleep, when suddenly we were all woken up to the sound of a loud shatter. Again, my husband jumped out of bed and grabbed his metal baseball bat within seconds. I too jumped out of bed and followed behind my husband to gather the children into a safe room, while my husband searched the house. After not finding an intruder, my husband came to me and told me to follow him into the kitchen. The children stayed in the room while I followed my husband. It was there that I found that the small window above the kitchen sink was shattered. There were also drops of blood on the windowsill, dripping down the inside of the kitchen wall. This window was too small for any adult to climb through, so we didn't understand why an intruder attempting to break into the house would choose to break this window. Also, this was the highest window in our home, because it was on a raised platform. Instead of trying to understand the person who broke our window, we just cleaned up the glass and blood and patched up the window with duct tape and a trash bag until we could have it fixed in the morning. My husband and I laid in bed still alert, just in case whoever had broken the window decided to come back, but nobody ever did. It wasn't until this final incident occurred that all of these strange occurrences began to tie together and make a bit of sense. One night, while my husband and I were sound asleep, we were awoken to the sound of a repetitive squeaking. Rather than just jumping out of bed this time, we both lay completely still, trying to make out the sound. That is when I realized that it was the sound of someone jumping on the bed. This was strange for two reasons. One, my daughter was a toddler at the time and could barely walk, let alone jump on a bed. And two, my son was at my father's house spending the night. Once my husband and I came to this realization, we jumped out of bed in the same fashion that we had many nights before. As we entered the hallway connecting all the rooms, sure enough, the sound was coming from our son's room. We slowly crept towards his bedroom door, and my husband carefully opened the door. and turned on the light. To our horror, the room was completely empty. But that wasn't the scariest part. We found child-sized footprints embedded on my son's once smooth comforter. It was after this that there wasn't a doubt in our minds that our trailer was haunted. The jumping on the bed continued to occur whenever my son spent the night at my father's house, which was often because he didn't like sleeping in his room anymore. In addition, our closet poles collapsed many times more during our 4 years while living there. We even had the kitchen window shattered a few more times with the same blood trail. It's sad to think that a child's soul was possibly trapped there and left to haunt whoever lived there. However, I don't think the child was the only one haunting that trailer. There was the thing that tried to get my husband to kill our baby that first night, and whatever caused my son to sleepwalk and stare at my husband and I while we slept. I'm just glad my family is safe after everything we went through, but we'll definitely never forget what happened to us while living in that trailer. I have a remote job. I work as a content writer for a really great company. Many people tell me how lucky I am to have found a legitimate remote job that didn't try to scam me for money or my information. Unfortunately, that is true with some remote jobs. However, not mine. I love my job. Since I was a child, I have loved writing poems, short stories, and even books. And not to sound like a complete nerd, but in school, I always enjoyed writing essays while my friends begged me to write theirs. I never did, but it was nice to feel wanted. I only work part-time at my job so that I can work on my personal writing. I enjoy writing what would be considered psychological thrillers. There is just something about a twist ending that intrigues me. Just when you think you figured the story out, you haven't. For me, it's a better thrill than any roller coaster or gory horror movie could give. Anyway, working remotely and spending my spare time writing my personal work has gotten lonely after a while. The only real human interaction I have is still through a computer when I receive feedback on my content writing for work. Most of my other human interaction is made up dialogue between characters in my books. So needless to say, after a while of this, I not only desired, but needed real human interaction. Unfortunately, my recluse lifestyle isolated me from people, and a simple decision to suddenly socialize in person felt like a big step that I wasn't ready for. So that's what led me to finally join the community group chat that my work offered. When I first started this job, a year or so ago, I briefly glanced at the group chat, but none of the conversations interested me, so I never logged back into it. However, this time, everyone seemed to be discussing their plans for Halloween. I love Halloween. It's my favorite holiday. They were all notified that I had joined the group chat, so someone happily mentioned my new presence with many exclamation points and included me in the conversation by asking about my plans for Halloween. Unfortunately, I didn't have any plans, but I didn't want to seem like a loser. I'm a writer after all, so it wouldn't have been too difficult to make up a facade of fake plans for them to envy. But ultimately, I decided I didn't want to start off my new friendship with lies, and I needed genuine human interactions, so I had to put the writer in me aside and tell them the truth. I simply replied back that I hadn't made any plans yet, since it was barely the first week of October, but that I was open to any suggestions the others might have. They seemed to enjoy this response, with one person sending a recipe for her, quote, famous pumpkin cookies, while another person recommended their favorite movies to watch on Halloween. And this led to many more recipes being shared and many more movies being recommended. I felt a warm feeling in my stomach, and a smile spread across my face as I looked at my computer screen, filled with joyful interactions. Then a new person entered the chat. Before anyone could include them in the conversation, they immediately replied with, quote, I have an invite for those of you with no plans. Many of us didn't live near each other, let alone in the same state. We all worked scattered across the U.S., so it was a strange invitation. Everyone remained silent, so I decided to be the one to ask what the invitation was. After sending my message, I received a reply saying that this person lived in Anaheim Hills, where they throw a huge annual Halloween party. They sent their address, and then said that anyone in the area was welcome to join. I immediately typed the address in Google Maps, where a huge mansion presented itself at that address. I then saw that it was only an hour from where I lived. Many people replied that they didn't live in California, or that they lived too far from Anaheim. But they thanked this person for the invite. I'm not sure what came over me. Maybe it was the adrenaline of conversing with new people, or the excitement that Halloween brings me, but I found myself typing and sending an RSVP for the party. My response was met with, quote, "It's going to be fun." And then the person left the group chat. The rest of our conversations went on, as a few left to make dinner or get back to work. I eventually left too, but I felt an overwhelming sense of satisfaction. I had my first successful conversation with real people. If you're an introvert like I am, then you'll understand how accomplished I felt. After that first day, I began checking into the group chat every night after work. I eventually updated my profile with my picture and a bio about myself, like everybody else. All was going great. However, the person who sent the invite about the Halloween party hadn't joined the group chat since. All this time, I figured that I just missed them, or they were busy planning their big Halloween bash. Before I knew it, it was the day before Halloween. I was reluctant to go to the party, because so much time had gone by without hearing from the person who sent the invite. For all I knew, the party could have been cancelled. Regardless, I had a vampire costume picked out, just in case, and a full tank of gas, and my car ready. I even baked the pumpkin cookies my coworker had sent a recipe of, to take to the party, if I decided to go. After work, I logged into my employee profile later that day, where I noticed I had a private message. I didn't even know we could private message one another, so I was caught off guard. I opened the message to find that it was from the person who sent the Halloween party invite. They didn't have their employee profile set up with a picture or bio, but neither did I at first, so I didn't find anything wrong with it. The message they sent said, quote, "Are you ready for tomorrow?" I am. I simply replied that I was ready, and would be bringing fresh-baked pumpkin cookies. They then replied with the time and address again, which was a nice thought, but I had already written the information down after the first time they sent it. We then sent our goodbyes, and I shared my excitement about the party. I could barely sleep that night, not just because of my excitement for the party, but because Halloween is my favorite holiday. Fortunately, I had completed all my work the days prior, so I was able to just get up and get ready for the party. I knew there would be traffic that would make an hour drive longer, so that's why I got ready early. I also had to make sure my laptop had enough time to charge, because I decided to bring it with me. As a writer, you never know when inspiration will hit, so I packed it in the car along with the pumpkin cookies before hitting the road. After a long drive, I finally arrived at the party. It was a huge gated mansion. I entered the code I was given and drove up to the property. There were tons of other cars, and people dressed up in various costumes. My introverted anxiety stunned me for a moment, while I looked around at the many intoxicated costume-dressed partiers. I felt like I was in the novel The Great Gatsby, not just because I was at a party in a mansion, but also because, like Nick Carraway, I had no idea who the host was or what they looked like. I finally escaped from a mental stun and managed to walk up towards the large doors that were openly inviting the crowd of partygoers. The mansion was huge, with 2 grand staircases cascading up towards the second floor and connecting in the middle with a gold-plated metal barred balcony. Up on the balcony was an elegantly dressed woman, staring down at everyone. She was wearing a red sparkling mermaid-style dress, with a slit on the left side, exposing her entire leg up to her upper thigh. She had beautifully shiny red hair that was parted to the side and draped down the right side of her face. That's when I realized her costume was Jessica Rabbit. She held a microphone in her hand and spoke in a smooth, buttery voice. She managed to gather the attention of everyone, despite the loud murmur of various conversations coming from the crowd. She thanked everyone for coming, and told us all to have a great time. She then disappeared behind a red velvet curtain that appeared to be blocking a hallway to the rest of the upstairs. The murmur of voices picked up again, and I, carrying my serving tray of pumpkin cookies, made my way around the crowd, offering them to those that I shared conversations with. I continued making my way around the party, and had a few drinks along the way to take the edge off of my nerves. I was having the best night of my life, when suddenly, people began passing out on the floor and foaming at the mouth. There were various screams for help, while others stampeded towards their cars. I stood off in the corner of the large room, watching the scene unfold before me. In the blink of an eye, the once packed room of joy and Halloween spirit was now emptied with only scattered bodies of slain partiers. Once the image of the aftermath of the party was engraved into my memory, I made my way back to my car. I placed the now empty cookie tray on top of my laptop in the passenger seat. Everyone remained outside, some sitting in their cars and some standing outside, all waiting for the police and ambulance to arrive. The outside of the beautiful mansion reeked with vomit, as some puked from the alcohol or from watching people die in front of them. After getting into my car, I started it and drove back down the hill towards home. The entire drive, I replayed the incident over and over in my head. The scenes of the bodies convulsing on the floor, the look of horror and fear as others screamed for help. I eventually made it home, without remembering much of the drive itself. I sat in my car, in front of my home, still replaying it all over in my head. I then grabbed my laptop from the passenger seat and began writing. Pumpkin cookies, laced with rat poisoning. What a great story. I love Halloween, but finding the perfect costume is by no means easy. The thing is, I don't like generic costumes, and for that reason, I can't just find a costume on a clothing rack in the Halloween section of a department store. No, I have to be creative. It takes me an entire year to look for the right costume. As soon as Halloween ends, I restart my hunt for the next year's perfect look. I am dedicated, and I refuse to be anything less than perfect on my favorite holiday. Last year was a bit different than my past years of costume hunting. You see, I have a method for finding the perfect costume. I go to faraway cities and sometimes different states, within driving distance of course, to find what I'm looking for. And once I find it, I cross that city off my list and never return there for future hunts. Last year, I had chosen an unexplored city and conducted my usual routine of perusing their local stores for inspiration. I was foolishly hopeful because every year leading up was satisfyingly successful. However, this time, each of my attempts were met with failure. I considered giving up on the city, but I refused to admit defeat. I would find my perfect costume. Months and months went by and I grew no closer to finding it. Before I knew it, it was Halloween and I had no costume. My frustrations boiled my blood, so I hopped in my car and drove once again to that city that failed me. It was nearly sundown when I arrived. The sun could be seen just peeking through the buildings and houses. Some eager families were already trick-or-treating, and some young adults were doing their last-minute alcohol runs. I tirelessly drove up and down the streets of houses, and finally downtown where all the shops were. And that's where I found it. My perfect costume. Her natural shiny blonde hair was smooth with elegantly constructed curls. Her smooth silky skin was dashed with glitter that reflected on what was left of the sun. Her big round eyes were a reflection of the Caribbean Sea. Her body was tightly wrapped in a bright pink, leather bodice dress. She walked on feet as smooth as the rest of her, that were elegantly held in matching bright pink heels. Her slim-fingered hands were decorated with modest-length acrylic nails that displayed bright pink bees painted on them. Men turned their heads when she walked by, and girls stopped in their tracks to envy this costume. It was perfect in every way, and I wanted to be her. She was walking alone carrying a 6-pack of alcohol. It's not safe for a girl to walk alone nearly at night, but perhaps in this city it was. I followed her in my car until I could pull over next to her and talk to her about my costume dilemma. I managed to do so, and she happily walked over to me when I complimented her beauty. I offered her a ride since she was walking in heels, and her slim arms seemed to be fighting the weight of the six-pack. She gratefully accepted, and she explained her inspiration for her costume and her decision of how to execute it, while I drove, and drove, and drove. Thanks to her, I ended my Halloween wearing the perfect costume. Now you may be thinking that her costume was clearly a Barbie doll, which is basic at best, but that's not what I wore that Halloween night. I sat in my favorite rocking chair, with my decorations and fireplace being the only light illuminating my living room. The crackle of my fireplace was all I could hear in the silent night of no more trick-or-treaters, and I sat, cozily wrapped up in my costume of milky, smooth, glittery skin. Halloween is the only time of year that I can truly express myself without being judged by others, so I take the holiday very seriously. For the past 15 years, I have been praised for being the scariest house in town, with the best and most creative decorations. My trick is to never use the same decorations twice. You can't scare people with something they've seen before. You always have to think outside of the box. That is how I have upheld my status this long. Also, because I am willing to do whatever it takes to be the scariest house in town. After the first Halloween living in my home, my neighbors learned that they couldn't compete with me, so every year they put up mediocre decorations from department stores or make homemade ones with their kids. It worked out best for us all, and I never have to worry about someone trying to take my title. That is, until a new neighbor moved in. My house is centered in the middle of a cul-de-sac, with 2 neighbors on each side of me. Both of these neighbors were more of Christmas people, so we had a non-verbal agreement that Halloween was my holiday, to be the center of attention in our cul-de-sac, and they could have Christmas. This was a glorious understanding, until my neighbor on the left decided to move out. A young couple, in their early 30s, bought the house and moved in around July. I thought of introducing myself at first, and even mentioning to them that Halloween is my holiday and that they can decorate during Christmas. However, I decided that they would learn soon enough. Finally, the last week of September was upon us, which meant the beginning of fall and the beginning of my decorations for the Halloween season. I typically put out decorations slowly throughout October, and then bring out an extravagant addition the morning of Halloween, as a big surprise. This method brings visitors to my home nearly every week to see each new addition. They typically just drive or walk by without speaking to me, which is fine with me, because I am not comfortable carrying on neighborly chit-chat anyway. As I was putting out the first of my many decorations, I saw the new neighbors were also decorating their house. They smiled and waved at me, but I pretended not to notice them. I was the only one that ever decorated this early, because my decorations required a lot of preparation, as I previously mentioned, so it was strange to see others doing the same, and was honestly quite upsetting. I didn't want the other neighbors to think that they could do the same. Then, I noticed that every day I was outside to decorate, they too would put out something new. I felt as if they were mocking me, perhaps for my lack of friendliness, but nevertheless, they were initiating a war that they would not win. I accepted their unspoken rivalry and glanced at them with pure ugliness every day that they were outside decorating next to me. Their decorations were lackluster compared to my extravagantly expensive imported items, so I was confident that I would maintain my title as the scariest house in town. Then came the week before Halloween. I was getting closer to my big finale, and I couldn't be more excited, until I noticed the neighbors had gathered a crowd around their home. I heard many gasps of awe, and everyone looked up at 12 figures hanging in my neighbor's trees. Strung up were very realistic human bodies. Their bodies were clothed in various long-sleeve shirts and jeans, with black plastic bags covering their heads and ropes wrapped around their necks. What made these replica human bodies look realistic was the curvature of each figure protruding under the clothes, the thigh to calf muscle ratio, the bicep to forearm, the smooth angle of each body part. It was all so real. I overheard one of the neighbors, who was gawking at the decor, ask if the clothes were stuffed to form the bodies. My neighbors replied that they were in fact mannequins, like those from a department store. I was furious. That was my finale for this year. They had made their way into my brain and stolen my idea. Now they were getting all the attention. It infuriated me. Not only did I have to change my finale piece that clearly would have been a success with the town residents, but I also had to be scarier. My decorations were always scarier because they were next to homes decorated in children's arts and crafts. I felt the pressure to be the best consume me. Those new neighbors weren't a threat at first, but they sure were now. Finally, it was Halloween Eve. In the past week, I managed to brainstorm a finale piece that would definitely be scarier than my neighbor's mannequins. As I was outside setting out the last of my preparation decorations, I noticed the town newspaper in my driveway. I never read it, because I had no interest in what went on. However, bold letters on the front page caught my attention. It read, "Halloween is cancelled." I picked up the newspaper and read the article below the bold heading. It stated that a total of 12 people had been reported missing in the surrounding towns, and the suspect left a pumpkin with a rope wrapped around it at the last location where these people were seen. Due to the authorities being unable to find the suspect, they decided to cancel Halloween for everyone's safety. That day, the residents of my town rushed to the stores to buy extra locks for their doors and windows, as well as knives and guns to protect them and their families from the potential intruder. I did no such thing. I only had one priority, which was my decorations. Halloween morning, I placed my final decorations out into my yard. It took a while because they were heavy, but when I was finished, I stood outside for a long while, admiring my work. I glanced over at my neighbor's decor, a worthy competitor, I had to admit. However, with everyone boarded up in their homes terrified, there was nobody to judge whose decor was scarier. So I decided to call the sheriff and local news station to our homes to see our decorations. Before I knew it, our entire cul-de-sac was surrounded with patrol cars and news vans. I closed my eyes and imagined the headlines in tomorrow's paper. The scariest house in town, the murder house. The article would read, "Bodies of 12 missing persons, found laid across the lawn disguised as Halloween decorations." As I stood there, picturing this, I was handcuffed and led to the back of one of the patrol cars. Even though I won't be able to decorate next year, or the year after that, or ever, my house will forever be the scariest house in town.